When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the world believed the last great communist empire had finally come to an end. But in southeastern Europe, the end of one empire awakened the ghosts of another. The Berlin Wall had fallen just 2 years earlier. Communist regimes across Eastern Europe were crumbling like dominoes, and every nation that had been trapped behind the Iron Curtain was suddenly rewriting its identity overnight. But while Western Europe celebrated the end of history, the Balkans were entering a power vacuum. For nearly 50 years, communism had smothered ancient rivalries, forced religions to coexist, and buried centuries of bad blood under a uniform red flag. When that system collapsed, nothing held those tensions down anymore. Old empires, old borders, old wounds, they all came roaring back to life. For decades, the only thing holding Yugoslavia together was a single man, Josip Broz Tito. A communist dictator to some, a unifying figure to others. But everyone agreed on one thing. Only Tito could keep the country from tearing itself apart. Then, in 1980, Tito died. A leg starved of blood, rotting from gangrene, amputated, too late to save him. With his death, Yugoslavia lost more than a leader. It lost the glue that held 6 nations together. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Inside Bosnia itself, those 6 became 3 identities, divided not just by ethnicity, but by centuries of religion. The Bosniaks were Muslim, the Croats Catholic, and the Serbs were Eastern Orthodox. Tito kept those identities quiet, but once he was gone, they roared back to life with vengeance. The country didn't break overnight, it decayed. A rotating presidency tried to fill the void, but without Tito's authority, Yugoslavia was a ship without a captain, drifting for 12 years until the storm finally hit, and into the vacuum stepped a new leader. Slobodan Milošević, a Serbian strongman, who realized he could weaponize nationalism and religion to seize power. His vision? A greater Serbia, built from the ruins of a collapsing Yugoslavia. In 1992, Bosnia declared independence. Milošević answered by arming Serb forces and surrounding its capital city. Sarajevo was sealed off, a European capital tucked deep in the mountain valley in the heart of Bosnia-Herzegovina, surrounded on all sides by steep ridgelines that gave enemy forces a perfect vantage point. A 1,425-day siege ensued. Snipers in the hills, artillery raining down, civilians trapped below, running across open streets, gambling with death. The world saw the chaos, the bloodshed, the war crimes. But what the world didn't see, what no one was supposed to see, was that in the middle of this already hellish war, something even more sinister was happening in the mountains above Sarajevo. Foreign men arriving quietly, escorted to sniper positions, and handed rifles. A secret so dark, so inhuman, that even survivors whispered it as rumors. So what was the Sarajevo Hunting Club? How long did it last? And why didn't anyone stop it? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
Sarajevo, a once bustling Olympic host city, only 8 years before, was now a collection of shattered buildings, burning streets, and terrified civilians sprinting from doorway to doorway to avoid the crosshairs waiting above. Inside the city, nearly 500,000 people were trapped. Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats, all now equal targets. The siege didn't discriminate. The bullets and shells didn't care who you were, what religion you followed, or what language you spoke. The Bosnian Serb leadership in the mountains viewed any Serb who stayed in Sarajevo as a traitor. A Serb living under the wrong government, the wrong flag, the wrong idea of what Yugoslavia should become. The roads into Sarajevo were gone. Food trucks were stopped. Medical supplies were blocked. Electricity came and went, but mostly went. Water lines were shelled on purpose, forcing families to line up at exposed intersections just to fill a plastic jug, knowing snipers watched those spots like hunting blinds. Sarajevo's residents began memorizing which buildings provided cover, which alleys offered the least exposure, and which hours of the day snipers tended to fire. They learned to run in zigzags, crouch low, and listen to the whistle of incoming shells. And looming over it all was the most infamous stretch of pavement in the entire war. Sniper Alley, a long boulevard where hundreds were shot trying to cross, often in full view of journalists and UN observers who could do little more than watch. The snipers formed their own grim hierarchy. Some were trained marksmen, some were very young conscripts trying to impress older soldiers, and some, according to survivor testimonies and later investigative claims, were not from Bosnia at all. That rumor started early in the war. People whispered that strangers, men with foreign accents and money, had been seen near sniper positions on the hills. At first it sounded impossible. Why would anyone travel into a war zone? But as the siege dragged on, the whispers grew louder. Civilians claimed the firing patterns changed on certain days. Something wasn't right. Rumors kept circling, carried by aid workers, journalists, and even some soldiers. Foreigners paying money to join snipers in the hills. Foreigners choosing their victims. The siege wasn't just a military operation anymore. It was a tourist attraction for the worst kind of person. What sounded like a wartime myth would soon be exposed in testimonies, documentaries, and allegations, so disturbing that even the survivors of Sarajevo struggled to comprehend them. And that's where this forgotten story takes its darkest turn. They called it the Hunting Club. Club member snipers targeted soldiers. Some aimed for anyone carrying food. Some deliberately looked for children. And some fired simply because they could. They weren't there to fight. They were there to hunt. It felt like the next level of depravity, and a conflict already drowning in it. And soon, evidence would begin to surface. Witnesses described payments, price lists, foreign visitors being treated like thrill seekers on some grotesque holiday package. In the city, dying from hunger and shellfire, the idea of outsiders flying in to hunt civilians for sport felt impossible. But so did everything else about this war. And Sarajevo would spend decades trying to prove what happened. The Bosnian War didn't end because the violence burned itself out. It ended because the world finally stepped in. By late 1995, the Siege of Sarajevo had gone on for nearly 4 years. Civilians were being shelled, sniped, and starved in the open. But after a series of massacres, including the Srebrenica genocide, the United States pushed the United Nations and NATO to act decisively. NATO launched airstrikes against the Bosnian Serb positions, targeting command posts, ammunition depots, artillery batteries, and the very ridge lines that had been used to terrorize Sarajevo. The pressure worked. Within months, the guns fell silent. The U.S. brokered the Dayton Peace Accords, and for the first time since 1992, Bosnia had something that resembled peace. And while the war ended, accountability took even longer. Slobodan Milošević, the architect of Greater Serbia and the political force behind the Bosnian Serb war machine, was finally arrested in 2001. He was charged with crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes. He died in custody in 2006 before the trial concluded, but the court later ruled his government was part of a joint criminal enterprise that carried out the atrocities. Yet even with the trials, verdicts, and confessions, one shadow remains. Because decades later, in 2025, Italian prosecutors opened a criminal investigation into allegations that foreign citizens, wealthy outsiders, had traveled to Sarajevo during the siege to participate in so-called sniper safaris, a secret hunting expedition where the targets were human beings. Witnesses have come forward, documents have surfaced, names are being quietly examined in Milan's court system. But still, no one has yet been convicted. No one has confirmed exactly who pulled what trigger or how many civilians died because someone paid for a weekend experience. To this date, what happened in those hills above Sarajevo, the darkest allegation of the entire war, is still unresolved. War exposes many things: cowardice, courage, and desperation. But every so often, they expose something much worse. The kind of evil that doesn't come from ideology or politics, but from the human heart left completely unchecked. And in the hills above Sarajevo, during the longest siege of a modern capital, that evil found a home and paying customers. Let us know your thoughts about the Sarajevo Hunting Club in the comments below.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or show ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.